So I'll need to press through to the first slide, which will be our presentation. The case study we're doing today is the leg, and this particular case study was someone that I saw actually quite recently, probably in the last sort of 2 months or so. It was a 42-year-old male cross-country runner and slash hiker, and presented with left lateral calf pain. He actually also just happened to be my GP as well, so he was a good client to work on. He sent me a lot of work over the years, and it was my pleasure to treat him for a change. The training phase was he was doing a hike in Europe. It was coming up. He was about 4 months out from the hike. The hike itself, or the trip, was going to require him doing 4 20-kilometre daily hikes, not one after the other, mind you, but in succession. They had a couple of rest days in between. So he was training quite hard, and he's obviously a fairly avid runner. And this particular type of leg pain came in just out of the blue, as these types of conditions do. That's not him, and that's obviously that isn't his leg sort of pain, but God forbid we had someone come in with that. Signs and symptoms for this particular chap was, once again, slow, insidious onset of symptoms, so it just sort of crept in. It was poorly localised pain, once again, which we find always challenging to treat, and it was of a deep nature as well. He also had a feeling of catching pain on efforts with increased tightness thereafter. So when he was going and jogging, if he was having to come into an incline or a hill or whatever the case may be, had to obviously recruit a little bit more load through the lower leg, then he would be getting those sort of catching pain. And I have a lot of clients over the years that have talked about having catching pain, and it feels like the calf is either going to tear or it feels like it's torn. In actual fact, it's not, because by the time they finish the run, they can dorsiflex and plantar flex, and there's no pain whatsoever. The symptoms were present at the lateral calf in the upper 2/3, and it would always start in and around that 3K area into the run. And the 3Ks for this particular person was fairly early into the run itself too, because he would tend to do 10K runs. So we'd be putting up, and every time he would have a feeling of catching pain, he'd stop, rest, walk for about 500 metres, and then start off again, and then see how far he'd go, and then it would all present back again the same symptoms. The symptoms, I suppose, at their resting pain, around about that 3 level, once again, not unlike the chap that we had for knee, and around about a 6 to 7 on the discomfort level as well. This is a famous picture of one of the elite runners, and that's pretty serious leg pain. Now, my differential diagnosis for this was obviously, first and foremost, rule out that he wasn't having, he's had a muscular strain, and a grade 1 muscular calf strain was the most obvious choice there. For those of you that have ever torn a muscle, it is extremely painful, okay? So there's usually no doubt that that's actually what you've done, whereas this particular type of group of symptoms was more along the lines of, it feels like it's going to tear, but it actually doesn't tear, and it's a catching pain. Myofascial pain, obviously, as I said, we always need to consider myofascial pain, being that we're soft tissue orientated. And then finally, referred pain from the hip or lumbar spine. And I suppose essentially, when it's in the leg, we need to be thinking about the nerve orientation with that as well, as opposed to the myofascial sling. Another nasty leg injury there. Now, my objective assessment, as it was with the knee, we're clearing the lumbar spine and also the hip movements. I also need to clear the foot, and this particular person had, once again, a pronation problem on the symptomatic side as well, and didn't wear orthotics, but had just bought new running shoes, which was a good thing, because the running shoes that they had at the time weren't that were probably the situation where they were old running shoes that he'd had for about 2+ years, so they weren't very supportive. His left hip internal rotation at the TFL was restricted, once again at that passive range. His prone knee bend was also tight at that end range, so some familiarity here. His plantar flexion also reproduced some of his tensional pain as well, so that's just passive range. And he had a positive lunge test and a restriction of at about 10 centimetres. He also had a positive left slump test. It was a modified test. Now this is a test that I had learnt from a colleague of mine at the AIS, and it's not a full slump test, but I will demonstrate it later and you can get a bit of an idea and picture. So, but it also reproduced some of the calf pain, which was really interesting because it meant that it obviously had some sort of connection with the upper body as well. Yeah, that's nasty. It's all about technique. Not good technique on that one. So we needed to rule out, obviously, the main culprits for lower limb injuries, and here are our wonderful tests again. The squats being the double, the single, the hopping, our Trellenberg gait, and also our muscle resistive tests, whether it be the thigh and the hip as well. This particular person was reproducing the pain on a hopping test and also a standing calf raise as well, which is essentially just raising on one calf. And you start off with a bilateral. If there's no pain, then you can go to a single calf raise. So once again, trying to reproduce the pain as much as we can. Now treatment started once again, as I said, I always clear out the lumbar spine. In this particular chap, quadratus lumborum was the focus for the upper body. Myofascial tension technique to our left gluteal fascia, because it was represented as well in our OBIS test. Soft tissue and myofascial tension techniques to the left TFL and iliacus that I've performed before in the knee case study, and myofascial trigger point of the left vastus lateralis, the piriformis, and also the wonderful glute muscles on that side. Myofascial tension technique to our left tibialis anterior. Now tibialis anterior is the opposing muscles for our gastrosoleus complex, but also our tibialis posterior. And with most leg injuries, I find, as I've talked beforehand, it's a matter of balance, and the tibialis posterior, so the tibialis anterior muscle tends to be the short and restricted musculature and fascia in most runners. And you'll find that gastrosoleus is more a lengthened tissue. So they come in complaining of tightness in the calf, but it's not necessarily short tight, it's lengthened tight. So it's tensional load as opposed to short and constricted. And then when you assess their tibialis anterior, their dorsiflexion, you usually find that tibialis anterior is really quite tight. And we also need to clear out, as I said, trigger points to our and myofascial to left gastro and soleus complex, but not for a lengthening process, more just for specific areas of restriction within those two muscles. With the client, after doing these procedures, we retest the lunge test to see if we've got an improvement, so increasing that 10 centimetre range of movement, followed by checking the single leg calf raise to see if there's been a change on the pain. At that stage, we were finding that the single leg calf raise was still reproducing the pain, and so therefore I had to look at other structures and isolate. So it was at that point that we went to tibialis posterior, and which is a very deep muscle. For most of you that have gone through anatomy studies, it's the deepest of the muscles in the leg, and it sits directly behind our tibia. And so it can be quite challenging to get to. However, I will show you how to get to it. Treatment to the deep posterior compartment had reduced the symptoms down to a 3. So we treated tibialis posterior, got him back up, did our single calf leg raise again. Symptoms have dropped right down to 3. We retested on hopping just as a functional test, and we started to treat specific areas on the hopping. So when he would hop, he'd go, I'd feel it catching, mid-upper third, 2/3 of the actual the calf, and then we'd get him back down on the table and retreat that area using myofascial tension technique. Now that was more so from a point of view of, I thought, neural restriction, so where the nerve and the fascia have intersected, and it was a matter of freeing those two structures up from each other. And that, as far as I was concerned, was the reason why he was getting that catching pain. Okay, we're having the deep-seated calf pain, but we were also getting that catching pain. And we know it wasn't a tear because we're not getting any swelling, we're not getting any positive signs on those muscle resistive tests, and there was no bleed. Because obviously if they tear a muscle, there will be a bleed. That being the case, and I knowing that there's some sort of restriction in the upper part of the lumbopelvic area, referred off to the chiro, and the chiro had adjusted the L5 area. Also referred off to the exercise physiologist to check for the functional testing loads, and he'd found that there was significant weakening within that tibialis posterior, so we gave him some tibialis posterior strengthening exercises. And also our wonderful glute medius was fatiguing as well under endurance load. So putting him on the real-time ultrasound and getting him to activate and see if it was actually recruiting or not. So all up, we had about 4 treatments of soft tissue. There was 2 off to the exercise physiologist and 1 to the chiropractor to get full resolution to this problem. The summary, potentially myofascial sling overload in the running sequence due to obviously an increase in his training, once again, intensity, the surface he was training on, so all of those had changed as well. It was a combination of a structural restriction, some soft tissue adaptation, and obviously, once again, the endurance fatigue. So they all made up a part and parcel of why he was getting this leg pain. And then finally, that side of pain was the fascial and nerve restriction. So that was the overall. And the first 2 treatments, I actually hadn't done any work to the deep posterior compartment. So the symptoms were still deep, and I was still scratching my head thinking, well, what else could be going on here? So it wasn't until that we loaded it up with the modified slump test and found that we were able to reproduce it, that I knew that was probably coming at a lot more deeper structures. And with the pronation, because of the new running shoes and so forth, his tibialis posterior got overloaded. Okay, yeah, tibialis posterior is a pretty important muscle in terms of the biomechanics of your foot. So if it's overloaded, then therefore it can allow the foot to pronate as well if it gets overloaded and if it's weak. So that was the treatment sequence for this leg. And I think what we'll do now is we'll go through some of the practical, technical demonstration of it. We work superficial to deep,